When the latest Batman movie came out, the atrociously titled The Batman, I had no real interest in watching it. I like superhero movies, but they are just so ubiquitous these days that it's just kinda hard for me to get excited about the latest installment of what's essentially the same story being told over and over. But then I had one of those things.
I'm having one of those things. You know, a headache with pictures.
An idea?
I theorized that whether I enjoyed the new Batman movie or not would be based solely on how it handled a certain narrative element that I consider the key to a good Batman story. One thing I've always liked about the Caped Crusader is he doesn't have actual superpowers unless you count his wealth and his gadgets and his super ability to not get killed. Aside from that, he's just a regular guy, albeit one who dresses up like a bat and goes around beating the crap out of people. But if you can look past the literal insanity of how he spends his nights, his reasons for doing so are at least understandable. Losing his parents was so painful that he vowed to dedicate his life to preventing others from feeling that pain. But, and this is crucial, he also vowed to never stoop to the level of the man who caused him that pain.
Your compassion is a weakness your enemies will not share.
That's why it's so important. It separates us from them.
It's these dual desires to defeat monstrous people without becoming a monster himself that make Bruce Wayne a compelling character, because those desires inevitably lead to moral ambiguity.
Tonight, you're all gonna be a part of a social experiment.
Think of how The Dark Knight ends. The Joker takes two groups of hostages and says they can either blow up the other group to save themselves, or they can all perish. Much to his dismay, neither side is willing to do what he wants, so he decides to just blow up everyone himself. Fortunately, Batman stops him by chucking him off a building. However, instead of letting him fall to his death, Batman saves him. He saves a homicidal psychopath who's killed countless people, including the woman Batman loves, and who will continue to kill countless people if he escapes from Arkham Asylum, which everyone, including Batman, knows he eventually will. So why save him? There's a great essay by Mark D. White in the book Batman and Philosophy, The Dark Night of the Soul, entitled Why Doesn't Batman Kill the Joker? In it, he talks about how Batman is caught between utilitarianism and deontology. Utilitarians believe in doing the most good for the most people, whereas deontologists judge the morality of an act based on features intrinsic to the act itself, regardless of the consequences stemming from the act. So whereas utilitarianism would be okay with killing the Joker because it would benefit the most people, deontology doesn't allow the ends to justify the means. Instead, the means themselves have to be morally correct, which means killing the Joker is wrong because killing anyone unnecessarily is wrong. If that doesn't make defeating the Joker hard enough for Batman, bear in mind, the Joker knows he feels this way. One reason he's such a great villain is that his primary motivation isn't taking over the world, it's throwing the world into chaos, specifically by getting people to violate their own morals.
What were you trying to prove? That deep down, everyone's exactly as you.
That he turned the moral crusader Harvey Dent into the murderous monster Two-Face is something the Joker's twisted mind must have loved. This is also why he invites his own death at the hands of Batman.
I want you to do it. I want you to do it.
In a way, if Batman were to kill the Joker would somehow win. But that begs an interesting question. Just because Batman is unwilling to kill the Joker in cold blood, does that mean he's always obliged to save him? Funny you should ask, because in the equally excellent and arguably superior Batman Begins, he faced that exact problem. The story culminates with Ra's al Ghul going full comic book villain and planning to unleash a deadly fear toxin on Gotham with the help of a vaporizer gun. To use it, he needs to reach the city's water supply, which is where the train he's on is headed, but with the help of Gordon, Batman has made it so the train will crash before it gets there. When Ra's realizes this, he says,
You finally learned to do what is necessary.
to which Batman responds,
I won't kill you, but I don't have to save you.
Then he takes off and lets Ra's die. I love this ending. Seriously, how do you not? Not only is it great by itself, it's the mirror opposite of how the story starts. But we're not here to gawk over narrative structure, we're here to determine if this was ethically okay, and if it was morally consistent with the ending of The Dark Knight. To answer that, I think you just have to ask yourself two questions. One, if Batman had thrown Ra's off this building, do you think he'd save him? And two, if the Joker was the one on this train, would Batman have let him die? And in both cases, the answer is clearly yes, Batman says so himself. So in response to my previous question of why did Batman save the Joker here, the answer is that he didn't so much save the Joker, he saved himself by not allowing himself to stoop to the level of the people he's trying to stop. It kind of makes you wonder, what if the Joker had just slipped and fallen of his own volition here? Would Batman have saved him then? I actually doubt it. Of course, that comes with its own ethical question mark. If you fail to save someone you easily could, then are you really any better than someone who kills in cold blood? I have no answer to that. It's the kind of thing you could argue about forever, and that's what makes moral ambiguity so interesting. It's ambiguous, it's messy, and the best Batman stories reflect that. And that's what ultimately got me to watch The Batman. I wanted to see how it dealt with the messiness of morality. I figured if it did so as effectively as Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, I'd enjoyed the film in spite of myself, stupid title or not. So how did my theory work out? I won't keep you in suspense. This movie was a lot better than I was expecting. Then again, it was directed and co-written by Matt Reeves, who also directed and co-wrote War for the Planet of the Apes, which was fantastic. So maybe I shouldn't have been surprised. Either way, the first half of this movie is pretty good once you get past it being just really dark and violent and depressing and not the kind of superhero movie you watch with your kids. I know Batman Begins and The Dark Knight weren't exactly comedies either, but they had moments of levity.
I suppose you're gonna lock me up as well, as your accomplice.
Accomplice? I'm gonna tell them the whole thing was your idea.
This movie has none of that. Batman is just a miserable person who beats the shit out of anyone who gets in his way. The police despise him. He treats the only person who cares about him like garbage. Even the people he saves are straight up terrified of him.
Please don't hurt me.
And I like it. Yes, the movie takes itself a bit too seriously, but once you get past the eyeliner and the little Nicky haircut and the excessive brooding and the Nirvana soundtrack, it's clear that Batman is in an existential rut, which is a good narrative problem because it's not clear how he's going to get out of it. It's also not clear how he's going to deal with this guy.
This is the Riddler speaking.
Who's just as violent and disturbing as the rest of the movie. Again, nobody's going to confuse the Batman with the Mummy, but this is still good storytelling. Our hero is in a weakened state, and his opponent is in a position of strength. Batman has no idea who the Riddler is or what he's up to, and those are also good problems. They meet Philip Pullman's dictum that the protagonist's task should be difficult to do, but easy for us, the audience, to understand. As for the moral ambiguity aspect, that also started off strong. Batman's whole justification for being a violent vigilante is he's supposed to be a force for good. It's the old utilitarian argument. The ends are supposed to justify the means, except here his efforts to save Gotham are having no effect, which calls into question him being Batman at all, particularly when you take into account his primary motivation in this story isn't altruism, it's vengeance.
I'm vengeance.
And again, I like it. Moral ambiguity is murky, but murkiness alone isn't enough. It still has to lead to the kind of ethical dilemmas that Bruce faced in Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. So what do we get here? Well, at one point, Bruce is told that his father, the great Thomas Wayne, whom he idolizes, kinda had someone killed, which shatters his image of his father. So he waits at the bedside of Alfred, who was almost murdered in a legit scary moment. Thankfully, it was just a bomb, and bombs aren't really lethal in this movie. So Alfred wakes up and Bruce is like, my father was a fraud and you protected him and I hate you. I was surprised. I thought Bruce was going to apologize for being such a jerk. Instead, it seems like he's going to lose the most important relationship he has and lose the moral compass his father provided. It's pretty cold, but it's effective because moral ambiguity is ultimately about cost. In The Dark Knight, whether Batman kills the Joker or not, it's going to cost him. He either violates his deepest principle or he allows the Joker to kill more people in the future. But here, Alfred is like, Bruce, your dad didn't mean to get someone killed. He's still mostly a good guy. And Bruce is like, oh, okay, and then they awkwardly hold hands. So Bruce and Alfred are close again, and he goes back to looking up to his father, and it doesn't really cost him anything. I don't think that really works. Later on, the movie tries again when Selina wants to kill Falcone. Again, if this is going to be an ethical quandary, then there should not be a pain-free way out. She should be equally tormented either by killing him or by letting him go. So what happens? Well, first, Batman won't let her kill Falcone.
We have to pay!
And then, once Falcone is outside, he's shot by the Riddler. In other words, just like Bruce earlier, Selina gets what she wants and it doesn't really cost her anything. I talked about this in my video on Dexter. If you give a character a moral dilemma and then have someone else solve it for them, we the audience feel cheated. And this is actually way worse than Dexter because it wasn't a dilemma to start with. Selina isn't Batman. She's not a deontologist. She doesn't seem conflicted about killing Falcone at all. If she had, I doubt it would have bothered her. Compare that to the scene in Batman Begins where young knowing Bruce is about to kill the person who killed his parents. Now, this is what someone in conflict with themselves looks like. And even though someone else technically solved Bruce's dilemma for him here, which I just denounced as bad writing, Bruce does pay a price. After getting what he quote-unquote wants, he realizes it didn't actually make him feel any better, and when he confesses to Rachel what he'd planned to do, she slaps him and tells him his father would be ashamed of him, and he knows she's right. Alright, last one. At the end of the movie, Selina is like, "Come away with me, Batman," and he's like, "I'm good." And then they go their separate ways. This isn't terrible. Bruce does pay a price here. He clearly likes Selina, and who knows, maybe he spends the rest of his life regretting not taking her up on her offer. So the scene has that going for it. The problem here is that Selina and Batman's relationship is pretty superficial. She doesn't even know who he is, and I think that was a mistake. If these two had seriously fallen in love with each other, and then Bruce found out that Selina wanted to kill Falcone, and he told her that he couldn't be with someone who kills in cold blood, then she'd have an actual difficult choice to make here. She'd have to choose between getting revenge and being with the person she loves. That would have been a lot more compelling than this. Think of the ending of Batman Begins, where Rachel tells Bruce she can't be with him if he's gonna keep being a masked vigilante. Even though you know what Bruce is gonna choose here, this scene is still heartbreaking because these two were meant for each other. They've been in love since they were kids, and unlike Selina, Rachel knows Bruce's deep dark secret and still understands and accepts him. Bruce thinks he's finally going to be happy, but instead Rachel gives him the hardest kind of choice there is, the kind that's going to cost you no matter what. And it does. Bruce makes his choice, and it costs him the life he could have had.
She was gonna wait for me, Alfred.
Now, was he right to choose being Batman over being with Rachel? I don't know. Moral ambiguity doesn't have right answers, which is what makes it so haunting, and which the Batman is lacking. To be clear, it has other problems as well. Again, the first half is pretty good, but it kind of fell apart after that. The questions posed in the beginning were interesting, but the answers the movie provided were not. The mystery of the Riddler's plan eventually became so labyrinthine I could barely follow it. I don't think it came to a satisfactory conclusion, and it didn't really seem connected to the Riddler. As for the Riddler's identity, when it's finally revealed that he's some random lunatic who's pissed off that Bruce Wayne got more sympathy for being an orphan than he did, it felt anticlimactic. I've talked before about how the best mysteries are ones we, the audience, have the opportunity to try and solve for ourselves. These questions aren't like that. We don't have enough information, so we're just along for the ride. To reiterate, this movie is by no means a train wreck, but it's also nowhere near as good as Batman Begins in The Dark Knight, in large part because it didn't deliver on what I consider the secret to a good Batman story.
Alfred, stop. You're not my father.